Hello everyone. Today we'll talk about chapter 8 and the cost of taxation. Actually, this chapter is an application of chapter 7, okay? So let's look at what we'll learn in this chapter. So for this chapter, we will look for answers for these questions. The first would be, how does the tax affect consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the total surplus? Then we'll move on to talk about what's the deadweight loss of a tax. Finally, we would like to talk about what factors determine the size of the deadweight loss. Okay, so those are the three important questions we try to find the answers in this chapter. Now let's look at the first one, the effect of a tax. Okay, so here I would like to draw a graph. So we have the price on horizontal axis and quantity on the vertical axis. So price on the vertical axis and the quantity on the horizontal axis. Okay, and then we will have, this is the demand curve. I put D here, and this is the supply curve. Okay, so we can get the equilibrium price, right? So equilibrium price is the intersection point here. And from this equilibrium price, we can just mark it as PE. Okay, and for the equilibrium price, actually we can find out the correspondent equilibrium quantity, okay, QE. So here we would like to talk about if now government impose a tax, okay, and the tax will equal T per unit, okay, T dollars per unit. So let's see, now government impose a tax. So assume this is the tax imposed. This is the tax imposed, okay? So here, this distance measures the tax, okay? This distance measures the tax. So remember, find out this point on the demand curve, and then you can get the corresponding price, okay? I just mark it as PB, okay? So PB here measures the buyers need to pay, okay? So PB is the price that buyers pay, okay, after imposing tax. And then find out another point on the supply curve, okay, on the supply curve, and then you can get a correspondent price. I just mark it as P subscript to S, okay, small s. So here we have P subscribed to S will be the price that sellers received. Okay, sellers receive. So here you can notice actually based on this graph was the text. So text, I use the T to represent, okay, is just the distance between, or is the differences between PV subtract PS, right? So this distance here, this vertical distance here measures the text, right? And then the tax will just equal to the price that buyers need to pay, subtract the price that sellers receive based on what we will have in this graph. All right. And then we have using the text, okay, after government imposed the tax, then we have a tax quantity. After imposed tax, we have QT. So you can also notice after government imposed tax, buyers need to pay higher price, sellers receive smaller price or lower price, right? And then even for quantity, quantity also decrease from Q equilibrium here to QT, okay? Now let's talk about the effect of a tax. If the government imposed a tax, do you know that's the revenue that government will receive? So the revenue that the government receive, I'll just put it here, okay? The revenue government received, the government, the revenue, government receives actually will equal tax rate times the quantity, right? And then we have tax rate equal T here, right? And then times QT. So this is the revenue that the government will receive after it imposed the tax. And this will also show on this graph. It's just this rectangular, okay? It's just this rectangle. Now, next we'll apply the welfare economics to measure the gains and the losses from the tax. So we talk about without tax, actually, this is our equilibrium price, right? And then equilibrium quantity. We can base on this to compute our consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus, right? After imposed tax, we still have consumer surplus, producer surplus, right? And total surplus. And even the government will receive the revenues. And then we want to compare which scenario will be better. So we will determine consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus, and tax revenue to be with and without tax. So we know the tax revenue can be reused, right? Can be reused in some beneficial services such as the infrastructures, construction, education, public education, right? So we'll include it in the total surplus. Now let's see. Here it divides this graph, okay, into several little chunk. So I will just mark this as A, okay? A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay? Similar on our lecture slides. Then I would like to say without tax. So I just write something here, okay? So without tax, what happens? Without tax, market is in equilibrium, right? So without tax, we know we will have the market equilibrium. I'll write it down a little bit lower. We will have the market equilibrium, right? We'll have the market equilibrium, and then at market equilibrium, we have the price actually equal PE, right? We have the price will equal PE, and then we have the quantity equal QE. Then can you tell me, based on this, what's the consumer surplus? So consumer surplus, as we talked about before, it should be the area below the demand curve and above the market price, right? And then the market price here is PE. So this area measures the consumer surplus, which will be A plus B plus C, right? So let me just write it down. A plus B plus C. Okay? And then what about the producer surplus? Producer surplus, we also talk about it should be the area above the supply curve but below the market price. So you can see it should be this area, right? Above the supply curve but below market price. So it should be the area of DEF. So this is the consumer surplus and producer surplus without tax. And then the total surplus, any tax revenue here. Here there is no tax. We just talk about the first scenario, okay? Without tax, right? So the tax revenue here will equal zero, right? And then based on this, actually we can compute our total surplus. So total surplus will equal consumer surplus plus producer surplus plus the tax revenue. So it will equal A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F. Okay? So actually it's this big triangular here, okay? This big triangle. Okay, so this is the total surplus without tax. All right? Now let's see. If we impose tax, what will happen? If we impose tax, what will happen? Impose tax. Now we have the tax rate as T, right? So the price is no longer in the market equilibrium price. So we have is not in the market equilibrium. Okay. So imposing tax now, we will have the tax rate equal T, and then T is equal PB subtract PS, right? And then we also have our quantity T, okay? We have the quantity T. Now, can you tell me after imposing tax, what's the consumer surplus? The consumer surplus here with changes, okay? The consumer surplus was still the area below the demand curve, but above the market equilibrium price, above the market price, right? So it should be the prices below demand curve, but above the price that buyers need to pay. So it's now the area of A, okay? So only A here will measures the market or measures the consumer surplus. Now look at the producer surplus. Now the price that sellers receive is PS, right? So it should be the area above the supply curve, but below the PS, okay, below this price the sellers receive. So only F here or measures the producer surplus. But after imposing tax, we know the government will receive tax revenue, right? And then the tax revenue will be the tax rate, as we mentioned here, will be the tax rate times the quantity, right? So the tax rate is T times the quantity. So it should be the area of B plus D. This area here, okay, this area here measures the tax revenue. Now we can get the total surplus, okay? Still use consumer surplus plus producer surplus and then the tax revenue. So A plus F plus B plus D. Then you can notice we have the new total surplus, right? Compare with our original one. Original, this is the total surplus. I just mark it as new, okay? New. And then originally we computed the total surplus will equal A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F. So based on this, can you tell me what the changes in this total surplus? The changes in this total surplus, what's the changes? We can get the changes in total surplus. I mark it as the delta here, okay? Small triangle here means the changes in total surplus will actually equal C plus E, okay? And then you can notice after imposing tax, actually total surplus decrease, right? So this area here, we can show it on our graph, okay? It should be this area, okay? This is C plus E. Okay, this is the area of C plus E. And then you can notice this area, actually it decreased the total surplus after government imposed tax. And this part has a special name, okay? This part, it has a special name. We call this one as deadweight loss. Okay, this is the deadweight loss. After imposed tax, total surplus decrease. And then the total surplus decreased by this triangle here, okay? And this triangle is what we call deadweight loss, okay? So any questions in this part? If not, I will just move on, okay? So let's see. After imposed tax, we have C plus E, right? The C plus E, as I mentioned here, is called the deadweight loss, always abbreviated as DWL, okay? Is the deadweight loss of tax, which means the decrease in the Total surplus results from the market distortion, such as tax. Okay, might be sometimes the government imposed price control also resulted in deadweight loss. All right, now let's see an example. Okay, so in this graph, okay, you can see we have the price, the quantity, and then we have the demand curve, supply curve, the intersection on one point, and that point actually is our market equilibrium price, right? Equilibrium point. You can find out the corresponding price equal $200, and the equilibrium quantity will equal 100. So the first question is, please please analyze, okay, or please compute the consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus without tax. Next one, it says if now the government imposes a tax of $100 per ticket, then please compute consumer surplus, producer surplus, total surplus, and total revenue, and the debt we lost. Okay, so let's do this question together. Let's see. After before imposing tax, or we say without tax, then we have their market equilibrium price, as I just talked about. Find out the intersection point. You can get the equilibrium price equal $200, right? And then the equilibrium quantity equal 100. Then the consumer surplus is just equal the area of this triangle, right? So the area will use half times base times height. So the base will be like 100, the height will be 200. So you can get the answer equal $10,000 as a consumer surplus, right? And also you can compute the producer surplus. So market equilibrium price, $200, and then you need to find out the area above the supply curve but below the market price, right? So here you can get the producer surplus actually equal $10,000 as well. Okay, then the total surplus is just the summation of consumer surplus and producer surplus. So just sum these two parts, you can get the total surplus equal $20,000. So I think part A is not hard to do that. Okay, now let's see. Once the government impose tax, what happens? So after government impose tax, then like this part, okay? After government imposed tax, now the tax rate here will equal $100, right? And then you can find out the new price that the buyers need to pay. That will be $250, right? And then you can find out the area above $250 and then below the demand curve, which will be this triangle showing on this graph. So use the half times base times height. Okay, so 150 will be the distance between 400 and 250, right? You can get height here. So you use 400, subtract 250 to get height equal 150, and then times the quantity. So now we have the new quantity equal $75, right? After imposed tax, we have the new tax quantity, so 75. So after that, you can get the new consumer surplus equal $5,625. Similar, you can get the producer surplus. So after government imposed the tax, now you can notice the price that sellers receive will decrease by $50. Originally, originally, we can get $200, right? But now the price the sellers receive decreased to 150. Then you can get the producer surplus equal $5,625 as well. After that, you can also compute for tax revenue. Okay, so tax revenue will equal tax rate times the quantity. Tax rate is $100 per unit, and then times the quantity, 75. So after that, you can get the tax revenue equal 7,500. Then you sum these three parts, you can get the total surplus. Okay, you can get a total surplus. So compare with the new total surplus and the original total surplus, you can notice actually total surplus decrease after government imposing tax, right? Therefore, you can compute the deadweight loss, which will be showing on this graph, the small triangular, okay, the small triangular here, and that part will equal 1,250. How can you get this part? So the deadweight loss, let me write it down here. the deadweight loss will equal the original consumer surplus, okay, subtract, no, the original total surplus subtract the new total surplus. So the original total surplus will be $20,000, right? Subtract the new total surplus equal 80, 18,000 and $75. Okay, $750. So finally, you can get the debt we lost will equal $1,250. Okay, so this is the way that you can get this debt we lost. All right, then we might want to ask, what determines the size of the debt we lost? You can notice from this demand and supply curve, actually debt we lost is this triangular between the demand curve and supply curve, right? So the shape of demand and supply curve will actually affect the debt we lost. So we would like to say, which goods or services should government tax to increase the tax revenue if the government needs? You can think about it. This debt we lost cannot recover. So after government imposing tax, then this part will be lose forever. Therefore, the government will try to tax on the goods or services that with the lowest debt we loss. Okay, so those with the smallest debt we loss should be the one that the government can impose the tax. And when is the debt we loss being small or large? So it determines on the shape of demand curve and supply curve. I will show you later. Okay, so let's see. Let's see the debt we loss and the elasticity of supply. Let me draw you two graphs and then it will be easy to get it. Okay, I will just draw the graph here. I just draw the two graphs, okay, side by side. This is the price, this is the quantity, this is the demand curve, okay? And then the first supply curve is like this way. It's like this way, this is the supply curve. And this is another graph. This is the price, this is the quantity, this is the demand curve. Actually, this demand curve and this demand curve are very similar, right? But now in the second case, we have the supply curve like that, with a flatter supply curve. So we suppose in these two goods, okay, this is one good supply and demand, this is another good supply and demand. So suppose the government imposed the same tax rate, okay? This is the tax rate that the government imposed. And this is the tax rate that government imposed. So these two tax rates, they are equal to each other, okay? And then you might notice the debt we lost in the first one is this triangle, right? The debt we lost for the second product is this triangle, right? And which one is bigger? Which area is bigger? Which area is bigger? Definitely the second one, right? So we would like to say, if the government choose to impose tax in these two goods, it's better to impose the tax on this one, on this good, because it will result in smaller debt loss. If the government imposes a tax on this type of a good, it will result in bigger debt loss, and this is not what we want to do. So you can see which goods or services the government try to impose tax. The product, either goods or services, okay, with lower elasticity. With the low elasticity, okay? Because this is more inelastic, right? This is more inelastic and this is elastic, okay? This is elastic product. Okay, so this is what we want to do, showing on this lecture slides. When the supply is inelastic, It is hard for firms to leave the market when the tax rate, okay, when we impose the tax rate. Therefore, the tax will only reduce the quantity a little bit. So this is the original quantity, right? Equilibrium quantity. And this is the tax, this is the quantity after imposed tax. But you can see from this one, this is our equilibrium quantity, but after imposed tax, we have the quantity decreased to this big distance, right? Therefore, we would like to say when the supply is inelastic after government imposed tax, the tax will only reduce the quantity a little bit, and which will result in small deadweight loss. However, when the supply become elastic, even the government imposed the same tax, it will reduce the quantity much bigger. Okay, much it will change the quantity a lot. So it will result in greater deadweight loss. All right, now this is from the supply side. Now let's see from demand side, what happens. Similar, okay, I will draw the two graph. So I can draw two graph here. This is P, this is Q, okay? This is the supply curve. This is another graph, P, Q, okay? This is the quantity, okay? And then we have the supply curve. So in first one, we have the demand curve like this. It's a steep slope, okay? So we can notice this one is actually inelastic, okay? And then for the second one, we have a demand curve like this way. Flatter, okay? Flatter demand curve. Flatter demand curve. And then this, what I would like to say, this is elastic demand, okay? Then suppose the government imposed the tax rate, similar, the same tax rate, okay? You can notice even these two are the same tax rate, right? But they result in different deadweight loss. The first one, the deadweight loss is like this triangle, right? However, for the second one, the deadweight loss will be this big triangle. So which deadweight loss is larger? You can notice definitely if the demand is elastic, then it will result in the larger deadweight loss, right? So if the demand is inelastic, the demand curve is steep, it will result in smaller deadweight loss. So we can say when demand is inelastic, it is hard for consumers to leave the market when the tax rate imposed. All right. So the debt we lost is small. Okay, the debt we lost is small. However, when the supply become really elastic, then even the government imposed the tax, consumers can switch to buy other products, right? So it will result in a larger debt we loss. Therefore, here we can have the summary, okay? Either from demand or supply, the demand is inelastic or supply is inelastic, it will result in smaller deadweight loss. If the demand is elastic and supply is elastic as well, then it will result in larger deadweight loss. So let's look at one practice question. What the deadweight loss of the tax is larger for those products? Breakfast cereal or sunscreen? Which one will be result in larger deadweight loss? Breakfast cereal and sunscreen we talked about before. Which one will has a elastic demand? We noticed that sunscreen actually has nearly no or very few substitutes, right? But breakfast cereal has more substitutes. Therefore, we would like to say the demand of breakfast cereal is much more elastic than sunscreen. Therefore, it will result in larger deadweight loss. Let's look at the second one. Hotel room in the short run and hotel room in the long run. We talk about how time can affect the elasticity, right? In the long run, people have more choices, right? So the demand will become really elastic. Therefore, in the long run, it will result in a larger deadweight loss. Let's look at last one. Grocery store or the meals at fancy restaurants. Which one will have larger or like which one will have elastic demand? Groceries probably is the things that we need to have like every day, right? But meals at fancy restaurant it seems like not necessary, right? Therefore, we would like to say groceries would be more inelastic demand. However, the meals at fancy restaurant were more elastic demand. Therefore, meals at fancy restaurant will actually result in larger debt loss if government choose to impose the tax. All right, now let's see the answers one by one. Breakfast cereal and sunscreen as I just analyzed, okay? Breakfast cereal is more price elastic. Therefore, a tax on breakfast cereal will cause a larger debt loss than sunscreen. Second one, hotel in the long run or in the short run. Similar as I just analyzed, okay? Price elasticity of demand or supply for the hotels are larger in the long run rather than in the short run. Therefore, in the long run, will result in larger debt loss. For the groceries and meals at fancy restaurants, then we would like to say groceries are more necessities, right? Therefore, a tax on the restaurant meals could cause a larger debt loss. Okay, so those are the answers for the three questions. You can see like what we have learned in chapter 5 elasticity, what actually has the application, right, on the text. Now let's look at if we change the tax rate, what will happens? Here we just fix the tax rate at T, right? But if the government think about, can I increase the tax more to have a larger tax revenue? Then the government should be very cautious about what's the appropriate tax rate. So policymakers often change the taxes and it will increasing some taxes or lower some tax rates, right? So what happens to debt loss and tax revenue when the tax rate changes? So let's look at this one. The debt loss and the size of the tax. So look at this one. Initially, okay, we assume the government imposed a tax rate at T, and then it will result in the debt loss, right? Now the government try to double the tax rate, then it will result in a new debt loss, right? From this graph, you can notice the new debt loss is more than double of the initial debt loss, right? Which means once the government double the tax rate, it will actually create or result in a larger, much larger debt loss than double of the original. So this is what we have, okay? Doubling the tax rate will actually cause the debt loss more than double. Now let's look at the tax revenue. Or like, okay, so if the government try to triple the tax rate, what happens? So if the government try to triple the tax rate, it will actually increase the debt loss much, much larger. So triple the tax rate will cause the debt loss to be much more than triple the original debt loss. Now let's look at the revenue. So actually government, it's not a good idea for government to increase the tax rate like by double because it will result in larger debt loss more than before, okay, much more than before. Now let's look at the tax revenue. Originally, okay, if we impose the tax rate, then you can find out the new tax quantity, right, at QT. So we use T times QT, which will be the area of that rectangular, which measures the tax revenue, okay, measures the tax revenue here. So now the government try to impose a new tax rate, like okay, for example, double the tax rate. Okay, so double the tax rate, we will have the new quantity, right? The new quantity, and then you can get the new tax you can get the new tax revenue, okay, which will be measured by that triangular, okay? Sorry, measured by that rectangular. And you can notice actually, when the tax is larger, it might increase. It might increase. So when the tax become larger and larger, increasing the tax could not be a good idea to have a bigger tax revenue. So I can show an example here. When the tax rate increased to three times as before, okay? So we will have the new tax revenue. And you might need to see the new tax revenue actually is smaller than the tax rate when it equal to T, okay? Therefore, we will have the summary here. A tax on a good can reduce the welfare of buyers and sellers because buyers need to pay higher price, but sellers only receive a lower price, right? So actually, the total surplus of their welfare would decrease. The fare in the total surplus is called the deadweight loss. Okay, and then this deadweight loss is always measured by this small triangular. We also talk about when the relationship between the Deadweight loss and the elasticity of demand and supply curve, right? So the price elasticity of demand and supply will actually measures how much buyers and sellers response to the price change. Therefore, higher elasticity means higher deadweight loss. Okay, higher elasticity means higher deadweight loss. So increase in the size of the tax will cause the deadweight loss to increase more. This is not what we want to do, not the government will intend to do, okay? And increase the size of the tax will cause the revenue to increase at the beginning. So you can see from our analysis, at the beginning, the tax rate is T, right? And when we double the tax rate, it will definitely increase the tax revenue. However, if we triple the tax rate, it will eventually decrease the tax revenue. So we would like to say an increase in the size of the tax will cause the revenue to increase at the beginning. But eventually, the tax revenue will decrease because the tax will reduce the size of the markets. Okay, so I think that's the end of this chapter. And this chapter is just the application of what we learned in chapter 7. Thank you so much.